Hello everyone and welcome back to Luke's Homebrew. I was recently running a session in my homebrew campaign where my party was traversing in an abandoned elvish ruin, hunting someone who had taken shelter in the darkness of the dungeon. While exploring, they found themselves ambushed by a poltergeist, who really had it out for them. It was an interesting battle, one player nearly died, and the encounter worked entirely as expected. However, there was a point of contention that was brought up throughout the encounter, and that matter was the poltergeist's innate invisibility. We'll go into that in just a sec. For those who don't know, these are the stats of the poltergeist in D&D 5e. And as you can see, there is the unique ability for the poltergeist where it is invisible and it can throw objects at people or vice versa. While it was hidden at the start of combat and invisible and being able to hover over the ground, I would say it was generally assumed that such a creature would not make any noise while moving, only shifting and freezing the air around it. But if we look at the core rules of 5e, doing such a ranged attack, such as tossing a spear across the room into one of the players, would break its hidden condition and then make it noticeable regardless of the invisibility and it not touching the ground, therefore not making any footsteps. That example is what is going to lead us into the topic of this video. What is the best method? Rules as written? Rules as intended? Or how I choose to run my games? Rules as logical. Within my 7 years of being a DM for 5e, I have watched countless videos on this topic from many different creators, and I have tried different campaigns running it strictly rules as written or strictly rules as intended, and each time I frankly feel unsatisfied. My players and I have gripes one way or another because 5e is, to be perfectly honest, a far from perfect system. For example, if you play a game that is rules as written, when you cast the Simulacrum spell, your duplicate could then cast the same spell again. And then that duplicate could cast it again, and again, and again, until you have an infinite amount of duplicates. Or even if you have more than one duplicate of yourself, it creates a vast disparity in power level between yourself, the party, and the monsters, just because the action economy that resides within D&D 5e. So obviously, if you play strictly rules as written, you run into issues the developers of WotC did not plan for, especially in the levels 10 and above. But if you go the other way and only play rules as intended, there are issues too, and that can be just as detrimental to the game's health. For example, the hidden condition is intended to exist as a determinate factor for whether or not other creatures can pinpoint what square on your grid you are on, or even if you're invisible. However, if you are a poltergeist that is invisible, hovering over the ground, and making no noise, there would be no logical way to be able to determine the exact spot the creature is. Though rules is intended, since the players need an easy access way of knowing where the creature is, it must take the hide action, rolling a stealth check higher than their perception, to maintain its ability for them not to know where it is. I proposed to the D&D and tabletop community the idea of rules as logical. I've not heard anyone else bring this idea to light, and if you have, please leave it in the comments. I would love to hear what they have to say. Using the core rule system of D&D 5e as guidelines and as the course of action for 90% of circumstances, maybe even 99% of circumstances, should be the general consensus. Otherwise, you are not playing the game, but instead your own different game or just glorified pretend. But in those other 10 or 1% of cases, such as my poltergeist example, would it not be logical for that creature to not make noise unless they choose to, as yet again they are floating above the ground, they're invisible so they can't see the creature, and its ranged attacks don't require it to physically move, just to will an object towards another creature. Or perhaps if you wish to cast the Simulacrum spell multiple times, is it not logical that such an action would disrupt the fun of the table firstly, or at least take a toll on the original character if those duplicates keep casting on themselves? Or even raise the question of, can an illusion make a copy of an illusion? Obviously, there are people that only seek to have power in the game because they tend not to have power within their real lives, and that's okay. That's why we play games. That's why we play D&D. That's why we play tabletop games, is to escape. But sometimes these loopholes that D&D has, other tabletop games have, it allows a certain aspect of those personalities to grow. But that's not what this video is about. I think it's obvious that D&D 5e has problems, largely due to WotC not hiring enough optimizers in their playtesting. But I don't think the rules should be interpreted as the law of the land even when it creates loopholes, or needs to be subjectively interpreted for what Jeremy Crawford intended. Additionally, following just rules as written or rules as intended tends to always swing the scales very largely in the player's favor. And if you, the DM, chooses to use the same actions against them, such as a Simulacrum casting itself infinitely, then it is either too much to keep track of, or just unfun for your players because they can't get a sense of enjoyment, even though you're doing the same thing that they would do. Instead, I think that since we as dungeon masters, and players alike, are all intelligent human beings, we should apply the general principles of our natural world to the fantasy world. Since we go through such lengths to immerse our players with rich lore and story, why not apply what we learned in school and apply it loosely to make combat more dynamic, and for the world to be more immersive and comparable to the physical laws that we live under in the real world? Perhaps fantasy should just stay fantasy and be ridiculous and fun, and realism should stay in the real world. But I really think it depends on you, your table, and what would be most fun for you and your players. I hope this video at least breaks the ice on encouraging DMs to feel more comfortable excusing some of the less thought over rules for a more scientific and homebrew approach to logical inconsistencies within their games. This video was very fun to make, and I really enjoy bringing these DM philosophy videos to you guys from the dark reaches of my mind to the community. So if you did enjoy, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. We also have a Discord server linked down below if you want to get to know me better, hang out, and really get to know some of the other members and our pretty amazing community that we're starting. I stream videos every weekend on Twitch at Luke's Homebrew, but thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.